The sump pump chose the worst possible night to give up the ghost. Rain hammered against the basement windows of our colonial-era house while I crouched in 3 inches of murky water, wrestling with rusted bolts that hadn't been touched since the Carter administration. My phone buzzed against the concrete floor where I'd tossed it. "I'm staying at my parents' tonight. Don't wait up. Kay?" I stared at the screen, water dripping from my hair onto the glass. Katherine had been pulling this routine for months now, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way she'd avoided eye contact during dinner, or how she'd packed that overnight bag with more care than she'd shown our marriage in years. I wiped my hands on my jeans and dialed Margaret Monroe's number. My mother-in-law answered on the second ring, her voice crisp as winter air. "Grayson? It's rather late." "Sorry to bother you, Margaret. Katherine said she was staying over tonight. Should I bring her anything?" Silence stretched across the line like a taut wire. When Margaret finally spoke, her tone had shifted from annoyed to arctic. "Katherine hasn't been here in months, Grayson. Perhaps you should ask her where she's actually spending her evenings." The line went quiet. I set the phone down and looked around the basement that had become my second home over the past year. While Katherine climbed the social ladder at her law firm, I'd been down here fixing pipes, rewiring outlets, and pretending our marriage wasn't falling apart one late night at a time. I pulled out my phone and typed, "I know exactly where you are. Come home." The response came faster than I expected. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Figure it out, counselor." 20 minutes later, Katherine's BMW screeched into our driveway. I watched from the living room window as she sat in the car for a full minute, probably crafting whatever story she thought would work. When she finally approached the front door, I was ready. The doorbell rang. Then again. Then she started pounding. "Grayson, open this door right now." I settled deeper into my leather chair, the one she'd been trying to get me to replace for 3 years. My laptop was open, and with a few clicks, I removed her access to our joint bank accounts. Another few keystrokes eliminated her from our home security system. The pounding continued. "I know you're in there. This is ridiculous." Through the window, I could see her perfectly styled hair coming undone in the rain. Her designer coat was getting soaked. Good. Let her stand out there and think about whatever lie she was preparing. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucas, my best friend who ran the boxing gym downtown. "Heard Katherine's car. Everything okay?" "Just peachy. She's getting a taste of her own medicine." "Want me to come over?" "Not yet. Let me handle this first." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I looked back at Katherine, who had given up pounding and was now trying to use her key. The lock wouldn't turn. I'd changed it yesterday while she was at her client meeting that lasted until midnight. She pressed her face against the window, and for a moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine panic. Not the controlled concern she wore in court, but raw fear. It almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. I opened the window just enough to speak through the screen. "Problem, honey." "Grayson, stop this nonsense and let me in. We need to talk." "About what? Your late nights at the office? Your sudden interest in working weekends? Or maybe we should discuss Victor." Her face went white. Even in the dim porch light, I could see the color drain from her cheeks. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't. Victor Fielding owns that fancy car dealership on Harbor Street, drives a silver Maserati. Ring any bells?" Katherine's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I'd never seen her speechless before, not even when she'd failed the bar exam on her first try. How did I what? Find out that my wife of 18 years has been sneaking around with the town's biggest sleazeball? Katherine, you left a hotel keycard in your jacket pocket. The same jacket I took to the dry cleaner last week. The Seaside Inn isn't exactly discreet about their branding. She slumped against the doorframe, and I almost felt bad for her. Almost. "Grayson, please, let me explain." "Oh, I'm sure you have an explanation. You're good at those. Remember when you explained why you needed to work late every Friday? Or when you explained why you suddenly needed a new phone with better privacy settings?" I closed the laptop and stood up, walking to the front door. I could hear her breathing on the other side, quick and shallow. "Here's what's going to happen, Katherine. You're going to get back in your car and drive to wherever you've really been staying. Tomorrow you can call me when you're ready to have an honest conversation about our marriage. But tonight you get to experience what it feels like to be locked out." "You can't do this. This is my house too." "Actually, I can. Check the mortgage documents. My name's the only one on them. You wanted to focus on your career instead of boring financial details, remember?" Through the peephole, I watched her fumble with her phone, probably calling Victor or maybe her lawyer friend Sophie. Good luck with that. It was past midnight, and even ambulance chasers needed their beauty sleep. Grayson, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. No, Katherine. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. What you did requires planning, lies, and a complete disregard for our family. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. I heard her heels clicking down the front steps, then the car door slamming. The BMW's engine roared to life, and she backed out of the driveway fast enough to leave rubber on the asphalt. I walked back to the basement and looked at the broken sump pump. Some things could be fixed with the right tools and enough patience. Others were too far gone to salvage. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. Veek. I smiled and typed back. You're right. It's just getting started. The next morning brought gray skies and the kind of coastal fog that made everything look like a noir film. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Ella, our 16-year-old daughter, shuffled downstairs in her pajamas. Where's Mom? Good question. Why don't you ask her? Ella rolled her eyes, a gesture she'd perfected over the past year. Whatever. You two are so dramatic. She grabbed a granola bar and headed back upstairs, probably to text her friends about her parents' latest fight. At 16, everything was either the end of the world or totally boring. There was no middle ground. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when Margaret's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Perfect. I'd been wondering when the cavalry would arrive. She knocked once, then used the key I'd forgotten she had. The front door opened, and Margaret Monroe swept into my kitchen like she owned the place. At 68, she still dressed like she was heading to a country club board meeting, even at 8 in the morning. Grayson, we need to talk. Morning to you too, Margaret. Coffee? This isn't a social call. She set her purse on the counter with the precision of a surgeon placing an instrument. Katherine called me this morning. She was quite upset. I bet she was. She said you locked her out of her own home. I leaned against the counter and studied my mother-in-law. Margaret had never liked me, not since the day Katherine brought home a blue-collar boy instead of one of her country club friends. For 18 years, she'd tolerated me at family gatherings, but I could always feel her disapproval radiating across the room like heat from a furnace. Did she mention where she spent the night? Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. She said she stayed at a hotel. Which hotel? I don't see how that's relevant. It's relevant because she told you she was staying here last night. She lied to you, Margaret, just like she's been lying to me. For the first time since I'd known her, Margaret Monroe looked uncomfortable. She adjusted her pearls, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. Marriage requires work, Grayson. Sometimes couples go through difficult periods. Is that what we're calling adultery now? A difficult period? The word hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire. Margaret's face flushed, but she recovered quickly. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. Your daughter has been having an affair with Victor Fielding for at least 3 months, probably longer. Margaret sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. For a moment, she looked every one of her 68 years. How do you know? I poured myself another cup of coffee, taking my time. Hotel receipts, text messages, the fact that she's been working late more often than a presidential campaign manager. Oh, and I followed her last Thursday night, watched her walk into Victor's dealership after hours. They weren't discussing car warranties. What are you going to do? It was a fair question. What was I going to do? I'd spent the night thinking about it, lying in our king-size bed that suddenly felt enormous and empty. I'm going to give her a chance to be honest. If she can do that, maybe we can figure out how to fix this mess. If she can't, I shrugged. Then I guess we'll find out what she really values. Margaret stood up, smoothing her skirt. Katherine made a mistake, but she's still my daughter. And Ella needs stability. Ella needs parents who respect each other enough to tell the truth. Right now, she's only got one of those. After Margaret left, I drove to Lucas's gym. The old brick building sat between a used bookstore and a sandwich shop, its windows painted over with the names of local fighters who'd trained there over the decades. Most of them had moved on to bigger cities and better opportunities, but their names remained like ghosts on the glass. Lucas was in the ring with a kid who couldn't have been more than 20, teaching him how to keep his guard up. The kid was eager but sloppy, dropping his left hand every time he threw a right cross. Hands up, Tommy. You want to eat leather for breakfast? I settled onto one of the folding chairs that served as spectator seating and watched Lucas work. He'd been doing this for 15 years, ever since a torn rotator cuff ended his own boxing career. The gym barely broke even, but Lucas loved it more than most people loved their families. After 10 minutes, he sent the kid to work the heavy bag and climbed out of the ring. You look like someone stole your lunch money. Worse, someone stole my wife. Lucas grabbed 2 bottles of water from the mini fridge behind his desk and tossed me one. Want to talk about it? I told him everything. The hotel key card, the late nights, the confrontation with Katherine, Margaret's visit. Lucas listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or shaking his head. Victor Fielding, he said when I finished. That guy's been working his way through half the married women in town. My cousin Jerry tends bar at the Anchor Inn, says Victor's in there every Friday night with a different woman. Classy. Yeah, real prince. So what's the plan? I'd been asking myself the same question all morning. Part of me wanted to drive over to Victor's dealership and introduce his face to my fist. Part of me wanted to pack a bag and disappear for a few weeks. Let Katherine figure out what she'd thrown away. But mostly, I wanted her to understand what it felt like to have your world turned upside down by someone you trusted. I'm going to give her enough rope to hang herself. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning I'm going to let her keep lying until she can't anymore. Then we'll see what she's really made of. My phone buzzed with a text from Katherine. Can we please talk? I'm at Sophie's house. Sophie Lane had been Katherine's best friend since law school. She was single, successful, and had opinions about everything, especially my marriage. I'd never liked her, and the feeling was mutual. I typed back, Sure, be home by 6. We'll talk then. Thank you, I love you. I stared at those 3 words for a long time before deleting the message without responding. Katherine arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, which meant she'd been sitting in the driveway for at least 5 minutes, working up the courage to come inside. She looked tired, older somehow, like she'd aged a year in the past 24 hours. Hi, she said, setting her purse on the kitchen counter. Hi yourself. Coffee? Please? I poured 2 cups and sat across from her at the kitchen table. The same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, helped Ella with homework, and planned family vacations that seemed like they'd happened in someone else's life. Grayson, I owe you an explanation. I'm listening. She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug like she was trying to warm herself from the inside out. Victor and I, it's not what you think. What do I think? That we're having an affair. I leaned back in my chair and studied her face. Katherine was a good lawyer because she was a good liar, but 18 years of marriage had taught me to read the tells she didn't know she had. The way she touched her neck when she was nervous. How her voice got slightly higher when she was stretching the truth. Are you? It's complicated. No, it's not. Either you're sleeping with Victor Fielding or you're not. Which is it? Her face crumpled, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd married instead of the stranger she'd become. Yes, but it's not about him, it's about us, about how we've grown apart. There it was. The truth, finally, wrapped in justification like a bitter pill coated in sugar. How long? 4 months. How did it start? Katherine took a shaky breath. I was handling a contract dispute for his dealership. We started having dinner to discuss the case. One thing led to another. One thing led to another. That's your explanation for destroying our marriage? I never meant for it to happen. I felt lonely, Grayson. You're always working on the house or at the gym with Lucas. We barely talk anymore. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where Ella used to play on the swing set I'd built when she was 7. The swings hung motionless in the still air. So instead of talking to me about feeling lonely, you decided to talk to Victor Fielding, in hotel rooms. It wasn't like that at first. But it became like that. Yes. I turned back to face her. What do you want, Katherine? Do you want to work on our marriage, or do you want to be with Victor? I want to fix this. I want us to go to counseling, maybe take a vacation together. Remember how we used to be. And Victor? I'll end it. Today. I sat back down and looked at my wife. Really looked at her. She was still beautiful at 38, still the woman who'd caught my attention at a college party 2 decades ago. But something fundamental had changed, and I wasn't sure it could be changed back. Okay. Okay? We'll try counseling, but there are conditions. Relief flooded her face. Anything. First, you cut off all contact with Victor. No more legal work for his business, no more friendly conversations, nothing. Second, you give me complete access to your phone and email. Third, you move back into the guest bedroom until I decide I can trust you again. Katherine nodded eagerly. Of course, whatever you need. And fourth, you tell Ella what happened. She deserves to know why her parents are sleeping in separate rooms. The color drained from Katherine's face. Grayson, she's just a child. She's 16, and she's not stupid. She knows something's wrong. Would you rather she hear the truth from us or the gossip version from her friends? Can we wait a few weeks? Let things settle down first? No. Tonight. That evening, we sat Ella down in the living room and explained that Katherine had made some mistakes that hurt our marriage. I let Katherine do most of the talking, watching our daughter's face as she processed the information. So, you cheated on Dad? Katherine flinched. It's more complicated than that. No, it's not. Ella's voice was flat, emotionless. You cheated, and now you're trying to make it Dad's fault because he wasn't paying enough attention to you. Ella, that's not fair. Neither is cheating on your husband. Ella stood up and headed for the stairs. I'm staying at Grandma Margaret's this weekend. This is too weird. After Ella left, Katherine and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she spoke. She hates me. She's disappointed. There's a difference. What about you? Do you hate me? I considered the question. Did I hate her? Part of me did. The part that had spent months wondering why she was pulling away, blaming myself for not being interesting enough, successful enough, attentive enough. But mostly, I felt empty, like someone had scooped out my insides and left nothing but hollow space. I don't know what I feel about you anymore. The next morning, I woke up alone for the first time in 18 years. Katherine had moved her things to the guest room as promised, and the house felt different without her presence, quieter, sadder. I was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Victor's dealership. Grayson Hale. This is Victor Fielding. I think we need to talk. Do we? Look, I know this situation is awkward for everyone, but Katherine and I care about each other. I think you should know that. I set down my coffee cup and walked to the window. Is that so? She's not happy, Grayson. Hasn't been for a long time. Maybe it's time to let her go. Let me ask you something, Victor. How many married women have you cared about this year? Silence on the other end of the line. Because my friend Lucas tells me you're quite the regular at the Anchor Inn. Different woman every week, from what I hear. That's different. How? Katherine is special. I laughed, surprising myself with the sound. Special enough to marry? Another pause. We haven't discussed that. Of course you haven't. Because you don't want to marry Katherine. You just want to play house with her until you get bored and move on to the next lonely wife. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Tell me, Victor, what's Katherine's favorite movie? What does she order at restaurants? What's she afraid of? I don't see how that's relevant. It's relevant because you don't know her. You know the version of her that shows up in hotel rooms, but you don't know the woman who cries during insurance commercials or who checks the locks 3 times before bed. You don't know that she's lactose intolerant but eats ice cream anyway because she loves it too much to give it up. I hung up before he could respond. That afternoon, I drove to the Seaside Inn, the hotel where Katherine had been meeting Victor. It was a modest place, the kind of establishment that catered to traveling salesmen and couples looking for privacy. I parked across the street and watched the entrance for an hour, wondering how many times my wife had walked through those doors. The desk clerk was a kid who couldn't have been more than 22, with acne scars and nervous energy. He looked up when I approached the counter. Can I help you? I hope so. My wife lost her wedding ring here last week. Katherine Hale, she was in room 237. The kid's eyes shifted nervously. I'm not supposed to give out information about guests. I pulled out my wallet and placed a $50 bill on the counter. I'm not asking for information. I'm asking for help finding my wife's ring. He looked at the money, then at me, then back at the money. Room 237, you said? That's right. Let me check with housekeeping. He disappeared into a back room and returned 5 minutes later with a small plastic bag. Found this under the bed. Is this it? Inside the bag was a silver bracelet I'd given Katherine for our 10th anniversary. She'd claimed she lost it months ago. Yeah, that's it. Thanks. I drove home with the bracelet in my pocket, feeling like I was carrying evidence of a crime. In a way, I was. That evening, Katherine was in the kitchen making dinner when I showed her the bracelet. Where did you find this? Under the bed in room 237 at the Seaside Inn. Her face went white. Grayson, I can explain. Can you? Because you told me you lost this bracelet 3 months ago. You even suggested we file an insurance claim. I forgot I was wearing it that day. Which day? The first day you slept with Victor, or one of the dozen times after that? Katherine set down the wooden spoon she'd been holding and turned to face me. What do you want me to say? I made a mistake. I'm trying to fix it. Are you? Because Victor called me today. He seems to think you two have a future together. What did he say? He suggested I should let you go. Said you weren't happy with me. Katherine's eyes filled with tears. I told him I was ending it. I told him I wanted to work on our marriage. When? This morning. Before or after he called me. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Here's what's going to happen, Katherine. You're going to call Victor right now and end it, in front of me. Then you're going to block his number and delete his contact information. Grayson, please, don't make me do this. You don't get to ask for favors anymore. You lost that privilege when you started lying to me. With shaking hands, Katherine picked up her phone and dialed Victor's number. He answered on the second ring. Victor, it's me. I can't see you anymore. My marriage is more important than whatever we had together. I could hear his voice through the phone, but not the words. No, this is final. Please don't call me again. She hung up and immediately blocked his number, then deleted his contact information while I watched. There, it's done. Good. Now we can start working on rebuilding some trust. But even as I said the words, I knew it was too late. The damage was done, and no amount of counseling or good intentions could undo what had been broken. Katherine had made her choice, and now I was going to make mine. I just hadn't decided what that choice would be yet. Dr. Patricia Winters had the kind of office that screamed expensive therapy, soft lighting, abstract art, tissues strategically placed on every surface. She was a small woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the patience of a saint, which she'd need for what Katherine and I were about to put her through. So, Dr. Winters said, settling into her chair with a notepad, what brings you both here today? Katherine launched into her prepared speech about how we'd grown apart, how communication had broken down, how she'd made some poor choices but was committed to rebuilding our marriage. She was good at it, hitting all the right notes of remorse and determination. When she finished, Dr. Winters turned to me. Grayson, how do you feel about what Katherine just shared? I think my wife is an excellent lawyer. Dr. Winters raised an eyebrow. Can you elaborate on that? She just gave you the closing argument version of our problems. Very compelling, very persuasive, but it leaves out some important details. Such as? Such as the fact that she's been having an affair for 4 months. Such as the fact that she lied about it repeatedly, even when I gave her chances to tell the truth. Such as the fact that her boyfriend called me yesterday to suggest I should just give up and let him have her. Katherine's face flushed red. Grayson, you're making it sound worse than it was. How was it then? It was a mistake. A terrible mistake that I regret every day. I turned to Dr. Winters. Doctor, in your professional opinion, is sleeping with someone else for 4 months a mistake, or a series of deliberate choices? Dr. Winters set down her pen. Grayson, I can hear how hurt and angry you are. Those feelings are completely valid. Katherine, I can see that you're experiencing a lot of guilt and shame about your actions. Both of your emotional responses are normal given the circumstances. So, what do we do now? Katherine asked. We start with honesty. Complete honesty. Katherine, you've acknowledged the affair, but I sense there are still things you haven't shared. Grayson, you're holding on to a lot of anger, and that's understandable. But if you want to rebuild this marriage, you'll need to find a way to process those feelings constructively. I looked at Katherine, who was staring at her hands. Go ahead. Tell Dr. Winters about the other times. What other times? The other times you've been unfaithful. Katherine's head snapped up. There haven't been other times. Really? What about your law school study group partner? What was his name? David? That was 20 years ago and nothing happened. Nothing happened? You spent 3 nights at his apartment during finals week. We were studying. In his bedroom? Dr. Winters held up a hand. Let's take a step back. Grayson, it sounds like you have some trust issues that predate the current affair. Katherine, it sounds like there may be a pattern of behavior that needs to be addressed. Can we talk about that? The session went downhill from there. By the end of the hour, Katherine was crying. I was angrier than when we'd started, and Dr. Winters looked like she needed a vacation. I'd like to see you both individually next week, she said as we prepared to leave. Sometimes it's easier to be honest in individual sessions. In the parking lot, Katherine turned to me with tears streaming down her face. Why are you doing this to me? Doing what? Making me look like a monster, bringing up things from 20 years ago that have nothing to do with our current problems. I unlocked my truck and opened the driver's door. Katherine, I'm not making you look like anything. I'm just refusing to pretend that this affair happened in a vacuum. You've been lying to me for most of our marriage. The only difference is that this time I caught you. That's not true, isn't it? What about the credit card you opened without telling me? The one you used to buy Victor Presents? Her face went white. How did you know about that? Because I'm not stupid. You think I don't pay attention to our finances? You think I don't notice when money goes missing from our accounts? I climbed into the truck and started the engine. Katherine stood in the parking lot looking lost and broken, but I didn't feel sorry for her anymore. I felt tired. That evening, I was in my workshop in the garage when Lucas stopped by with a six-pack of beer and a grim expression. "Heard you went to couples therapy today." News travels fast in this town. "Sophie Lane was at the gym this afternoon, running her mouth about how you're being unreasonable and Katherine deserves better." I looked up from the cabinet door I was sanding. "Sophie was at your gym?" "Yeah, signed up for a membership. Says she wants to get in shape for summer. Spent most of her time gossiping with the other women about your marriage." Sophie Lane had never shown interest in physical fitness in the 15 years I'd known her. She was up to something. What else did she say? That Katherine made one mistake and you're punishing her for it. That you're being controlling and manipulative. That maybe she should just leave you and start fresh with someone who appreciates her. I set down the sandpaper and opened one of the beers Lucas had brought. "Someone like Victor?" She didn't mention him by name, but yeah, that was the implication. Interesting. Katherine told me she ended things with Victor. Did she? It was a good question. Katherine had made the phone call in front of me, but that didn't mean it was over. For all I knew, they'd worked out some kind of code beforehand. "I'm ending it" could mean "I'm ending it for now," or "I'm ending it until this blows over." I need to find out for sure. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time to do a little detective work." The next day was Saturday, which meant Katherine would be at her office catching up on paperwork. She'd been going in on weekends for months, claiming she was behind on her cases. I'd never questioned it before, but now I wondered if she'd been meeting Victor there. I drove to the law firm where Katherine worked and parked across the street. Her BMW was in the parking lot, along with 3 other cars. I settled in to wait. At 11:30, Katherine emerged from the building with Sophie Lane. They stood by Katherine's car talking for several minutes, their body language animated and intense. Then Sophie got in her own car and drove away, followed a few minutes later by Katherine. I followed Katherine at a distance, staying several cars back. She drove through downtown, past the harbor, and into the industrial section where Victor's dealership was located. My heart sank as I watched her pull into the parking lot. Victor was waiting for her by the service entrance. Even from a distance, I could see him smile as she approached. They embraced, and he led her inside the building. I sat in my truck for 30 minutes, staring at the dealership and feeling something cold settle in my chest. Katherine had looked me in the eye and promised she was ending the affair. She'd called Victor and told him it was over. She'd agreed to counseling and transparency and all the other conditions I'd set. And it had all been lies. My phone rang. It was Katherine. "Hi, honey. I'm going to be at the office for a few more hours. Don't wait lunch for me." "Okay. Getting a lot done?" "Yes. Finally making some progress on the Morrison case. I should be home by dinner." "See you then." I hung up and looked back at the dealership. My wife was inside with her lover, probably laughing about how easily she'd fooled me. How naive I was to believe she wanted to save our marriage. Well, if Katherine wanted to play games, I could play games too. I drove to the hardware store and bought a small digital camera with a telephoto lens. Then I went home and did some research on private investigation techniques. If Katherine was going to lie to me, I was going to document every lie. Over the next week, I followed Katherine 3 more times. Twice she went to Victor's dealership during her lunch break. Once she met him at a restaurant on the other side of town, a place where they were unlikely to be seen by anyone we knew. I took pictures of everything, Katherine and Victor holding hands across a restaurant table, Victor kissing her goodbye in the parking lot of his dealership, Katherine getting into Victor's Maserati instead of her own car. By Friday, I had enough evidence to end our marriage 10 times over. But I wasn't ready to end it yet. I wanted Katherine to understand what it felt like to have your world pulled out from under you. I wanted her to experience the same confusion and betrayal I'd been living with for months, so I decided to get creative. Saturday morning, I told Katherine I was going to spend the day at Lucas's gym, working out and helping him with some repairs. Instead, I drove to Victor's house, a gaudy McMansion on the expensive side of town. Victor's Maserati was in the driveway, along with a red convertible I didn't recognize. I parked down the street and walked back to his house, staying in the shadows of the oak trees that lined the sidewalk. The convertible belonged to a blonde woman in her 30s who was clearly not my wife. I watched through the living room window as Victor poured wine for his guest, who was wearing a dress that left little to the imagination. So much for Katherine being special. I took pictures of Victor with his other woman, making sure to capture their faces clearly. Then I drove home and uploaded the photos to my computer. Katherine was in the kitchen when I got back, making dinner and humming softly to herself. She looked happy, relaxed, like a woman who thought she was getting away with something. How was your day? She asked, kissing me on the cheek. Productive. How was yours? Quiet. Did some shopping, caught up on reading. Very domestic. That's nice. I helped her set the table, and we ate dinner like a normal married couple. Katherine talked about her work, her plans for the weekend, a funny story she'd heard from one of her colleagues. She was a good actress, I had to give her that. After dinner, I excused myself to my workshop and printed out the photos I'd taken at Victor's house. Then I slipped them into an envelope and wrote Katherine's name on the outside. Tomorrow she was going to get a surprise. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of perfect weather that made coastal New England look like a postcard. Katherine was still asleep when I left the envelope on her nightstand, right next to her coffee cup and the Sunday paper I'd brought up from the driveway. I was downstairs making breakfast when I heard her scream, "Grayson, get up here right now." I took my time climbing the stairs, carrying my own coffee cup and trying to look curious rather than satisfied. Katherine was sitting on the edge of the bed, the photographs scattered around her like fallen leaves. "Where did you get these?" "Does it matter?" "These are from yesterday. You followed me?" I sat down in the chair by the window, the same chair where I used to read bedtime stories to Ella when she was small. "Actually, I followed Victor. You just happened to be there." Katherine's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You had no right." "I had no right?" "Katherine, you've been lying to me for a week. You stood in our kitchen and promised you'd ended things with Victor. You called him and told him it was over. Then you went right back to sneaking around with him." "It's not what you think." "Really? Because it looks like my wife is having an affair with a man who's also seeing other women. It looks like you're not as special to him as you thought you were." Katherine picked up one of the photographs, the one showing Victor and the blonde woman kissing on his couch. "Who is she?" "I have no idea, but she seems to know Victor pretty well." "This doesn't change anything between us." "Doesn't it? Katherine, look at these pictures. Really look at them. This is the man you've been risking our marriage for. This is the man you've been lying to me about. He's cheating on you while you're cheating on me." Katherine stood up and walked to the dresser, staring at herself in the mirror. "You don't understand. Victor and I have something real." "So real that he's sleeping with other women?" "We never said we were exclusive." I almost laughed. "But we did. 18 years ago when we got married. Remember that? The part about forsaking all others? Don't throw our wedding vows in my face." "Why not? You threw them away first." Katherine turned around, and I could see tears in her eyes. But I was past feeling sorry for her. She'd made her choices, and now she was going to live with the consequences. "What do you want from me, Grayson?" "I want you to be honest. For once in our marriage, I want you to tell me the truth." "Fine. You want the truth? I don't love you anymore. I haven't loved you for years. You're boring, you're predictable, and you have no ambition. Victor makes me feel alive in a way you never could." There it was. The truth finally, sharp and clean as a blade between the ribs. I'd been expecting it, but it still hurt to hear. "Thank you." "Thank you. For finally being honest. It's the first real thing you've said to me in months." I stood up and walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "Just so you know, I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. You can keep Victor, the house, whatever you want. But this marriage is over." "Grayson, wait!" But I was already walking down the stairs, already planning my next move. If Katherine wanted Victor so badly, she could have him. But first, she was going to find out exactly what kind of man she was choosing over her family. I spent Sunday afternoon at Lucas's gym, hitting the heavy bag until my hands were raw and my shirt was soaked with sweat. Lucas watched me work out with growing concern. "You're going to hurt yourself if you keep that up." "Maybe that's the point?" "Talk to me, man. What's going on?" I told him about the photographs, about Katherine's confession, about my decision to file for divorce. Lucas listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or shaking his head. "I'm sorry, Grayson. I know how much you wanted to save your marriage." "Did I? Or did I just want to win?" It was a good question, one I'd been asking myself all day. Had I really wanted to reconcile with Katherine, or had I just wanted to prove I was better than Victor? Had I been trying to save my marriage, or just my pride? "Does it matter now?" I guess not. Lucas handed me a towel and a bottle of water. "So what's next?" "I'm going to make sure Katherine knows exactly what she's getting herself into." "What does that mean?" I told him about my plan. Lucas listened with growing alarm. "Grayson, that's not a good idea. You're angry, and you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months." "This isn't you, man. You're not vindictive." "Maybe it's time I was." Monday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the private investigator's office downtown. Jerry Kowalski was a former cop who'd opened his own agency after retiring from the force. He was expensive, but he was thorough. "I need you to investigate Victor Fielding," I told him, sliding a check across his desk. "What kind of investigation?" "Everything. His business practices, his personal life, his financial situation. I want to know every secret he's ever kept." Jerry looked at the check, then at me. "This is about your wife, isn't it?" "How did you know?" "Small town. Word gets around. You sure you want to go down this road?" "I'm sure. It's going to get messy. It's already messy." Jerry nodded and filed the check in his desk drawer. "Give me 2 weeks." While Jerry was digging into Victor's background, I started working on Katherine. Nothing obvious, nothing she could trace back to me. Just small things that would make her question what she thought she knew about her new boyfriend. I started by creating a fake social media account and friending several of Victor's employees. It didn't take long to learn that Victor's dealership was in financial trouble. He'd been cutting corners, selling cars with hidden problems, and treating his staff poorly. I printed out screenshots of online reviews from unhappy customers and left them in places where Katherine would find them, in her car, in her briefcase, taped to the bathroom mirror. Next, I did some research on the blonde woman I'd photographed at Victor's house. Her name was Melissa Torres, and she was a real estate agent from the next town over. According to her social media profiles, she'd been seeing Victor for at least 6 months. I created another fake account and sent Katherine an anonymous message with links to Melissa's photos with Victor. Photos that were clearly taken before Katherine's affair had started. The psychological pressure started to show. Katherine became irritable, distracted. She started questioning me about my whereabouts, accusing me of following her. She wasn't wrong, but I denied everything. "You're being paranoid," I told her over dinner one night. "Someone is sending me information about Victor. Anonymous messages, photographs, documents about his business. Maybe it's one of his other girlfriends." Katherine's fork clattered against her plate. "What other girlfriends?" "Katherine, you can't be that naive. Victor Fielding has been working his way through half the women in this town for years. Did you really think you were the only one?" "He told me I was special." "I'm sure he tells all of them that." That night, I heard Katherine on the phone with Victor, their voices raised in argument. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear enough. The fairy tale was starting to crumble. 2 weeks later, Jerry Kowalski called me with his report. "You're not going to like what I found. Try me. Victor Fielding is in serious financial trouble. His dealership is 3 months behind on rent. He owes money to several banks, and there's a lien on his personal assets. He's been running a side business selling stolen car parts, and the state attorney general's office is investigating him for fraud. Anything else? He's got a gambling problem, owes money to some people you don't want to owe money to, and he's been married twice before, both times to wealthy women who divorced him when they found out he was cheating." "What about other women?" "At least 4 that I could document, all of them married, all of them convinced they were his only girlfriend. Your wife is just the latest in a long line." I thanked Jerry and hung up, then sat in my truck staring at the report he'd prepared. Katherine had thrown away our marriage for a man who was not only unfaithful, but also a criminal. It was time for the final confrontation. I waited until Saturday night, when I knew Katherine would be at Victor's house. Then I drove over there and parked across the street, just like I had 2 weeks earlier. This time, I didn't just take pictures. This time, I got out of my truck and walked up to Victor's front door. He answered on the second knock, wearing a silk robe and a surprised expression. "Grayson, what are you doing here?" "I came to talk to you about Katherine." "She's not here. Her car's in your driveway." Victor glanced over his shoulder, then stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "Look, I know this is awkward, but Katherine and I are adults. We can make our own decisions." "Can you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're making decisions for a lot of women. How many is it now, Victor? 4, 5? "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone and showed him a photograph of him with Melissa Torres. "This was taken last week, while you were telling my wife she was the only woman in your life." Victor's face went pale. "Where did you get that? Does it matter? The point is, Katherine deserves to know what kind of man she's destroying her marriage for." "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" I pulled out Jerry's report and handed it to him. Victor scanned the first page, his expression growing more worried with each line. "This is harassment. This is truth. Katherine's inside, isn't she? Why don't we go in and share it with her? Get off my property." "Or what? You'll call the police?" "I'm sure they'd be very interested in this report, especially the part about the stolen car parts." Victor's hands were shaking as he handed the report back to me. "What do you want?" I want you to tell Katherine the truth. All of it. The other women, the financial problems, the criminal investigation. Everything. And if I don't, then I will, but it'll be a lot more embarrassing if it comes from me. Victor stared at me for a long moment, then opened his front door. Katherine, can you come out here for a minute? Katherine appeared in the doorway wearing one of Victor's shirts and a confused expression. Grayson, what are you doing here? Victor has something he wants to tell you. Katherine looked back and forth between us, sensing the tension. What's going on? Victor cleared his throat. Katherine, there are some things about me that you don't know. Things I should have told you before. What things? I handed her Jerry's report. Why don't you read this first? Then Victor can fill in the details. Katherine took the report with trembling hands and began to read. I watched her face change as she absorbed the information. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to anger, then to something that looked like heartbreak. Is this true? She asked Victor. Some of it is exaggerated. Is it true? Victor's shoulders sagged. Yes. Katherine looked at the report again, then at Victor, then at me. You're married to someone else? Divorced, twice. And the other women? It's complicated. It's not complicated. Katherine's voice rose to a shout. Either you're seeing other women or you're not. Katherine, please, let me explain. But Katherine was already walking back into the house. A few minutes later, she emerged fully dressed, carrying her purse and car keys. Katherine, wait! Victor called after her. She ignored him, walking past both of us toward her car. I followed her. Katherine. She stopped and turned around, tears streaming down her face. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted? I wanted you to know the truth. The truth? The truth is that I threw away my marriage for a man who's been lying to me from the beginning. The truth is that I'm an idiot. You're not an idiot. You're just human. Katherine wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What happens now? Now we figure out how to move forward. For Ella's sake, if nothing else. Katherine nodded and got in her car. As she drove away, I looked back at Victor, who was standing in his doorway looking defeated. Stay away from my wife, I told him. She's not your wife anymore. No, she's not. But she's still the mother of my daughter. And if you ever come near either of them again, you'll have bigger problems than stolen car parts to worry about. I walked back to my truck, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but a kind of calm resolution. The marriage was over, but at least now it was over honestly. Katherine was waiting for me when I got home, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and red eyes. We need to talk, she said. Yes, we do. I'm sorry, Grayson, for all of it. For the lying, for the affair, for throwing away what we had. I know. Do you think we can ever be friends again? For Ella? I sat down across from her and considered the question. Could I forgive Katherine? Could I trust her again? Could we find a way to co-parent our daughter without the poison of betrayal contaminating every interaction? I don't know, I said finally. But I think we have to try. Katherine nodded, tears falling into her tea. I loved you once, you know. Really loved you. I know. I loved you too. What went wrong? I don't know. Maybe we just grew into different people. Maybe we stopped paying attention to each other. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. We sat in silence for a while. Two people who had once promised to love each other forever, now trying to figure out how to say goodbye with dignity. Finally, Katherine spoke. I'll move out this week. Find an apartment downtown. You don't have to rush. Yes, I do. We both need space to figure out what comes next. What about Ella? We'll share custody, work out a schedule that's fair to everyone. I nodded. It wasn't the ending I'd hoped for when this all started, but it was an ending I could live with. Katherine? Yeah? For what it's worth, I hope you find what you're looking for. Just maybe look for it in someone who's actually available next time. Katherine almost smiled. Yeah, I think I've learned my lesson about married men and car dealers. Both categories are probably best avoided. This time she did smile. Just a little. Probably. The next morning, Katherine started packing her things. Ella helped, though she was clearly struggling with the reality of her parents' divorce. We all were. Are you sure this is what you want? Ella asked me while Katherine was loading boxes into her car. It's what needs to happen. But you still love her, don't you? I looked at my daughter, 16 years old, and trying to make sense of adult problems that didn't have easy answers. Love isn't always enough, sweetheart. Sometimes people hurt each other too badly to find their way back. That's depressing. Yeah, it is, but it's also honest. Ella nodded, processing this information with the gravity of someone much older than her years. Will you be okay? Eventually. Will Mom? I think so. She's stronger than she looks. What about me? I put my arm around my daughter and pulled her close. You're going to be fine. Better than fine. You're going to have two parents who love you very much, even if they can't live together anymore. Promise? Promise. Katherine left that afternoon, driving away from the house where we'd built our life together, where we'd raised our daughter, where we'd been happy once upon a time. I watched from the window until her taillights disappeared around the corner, then I went to my workshop and started sanding a piece of wood that didn't need sanding. Ella found me there an hour later. Dad? Yeah? Are you crying? I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. Maybe a little. It's okay, I won't tell anyone. Thanks, kiddo. She sat down on my workbench and watched me sand the same spot over and over again. What are you making? I have no idea. Can I help? Sure. We worked together in comfortable silence as the sun set outside the garage windows. It wasn't the family I'd planned on, but it was the family I had. And maybe that would be enough. 3 months later, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. The divorce papers had been filed, the custody arrangement was working, and Ella was adjusting better than I'd expected. Katherine had rented a small apartment downtown and was throwing herself into her work with the kind of intensity that suggested she was trying not to think too hard about the choices she'd made. As for Victor Fielding, the state attorney general's investigation had resulted in criminal charges. His dealership had closed, and he'd left town owing money to half the businesses on Harbor Street. I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved to Florida, probably to start fresh with a new set of victims. I was at Lucas's gym on a Friday afternoon, working out and enjoying the simple pleasure of physical exertion, when Sophie Lane approached me. I hadn't seen her since Katherine moved out, and I wasn't particularly happy to see her now. Grayson, can we talk? I'm kind of busy, Sophie. It's important. I looked at her more carefully. Sophie was usually perfectly put together, but today she looked frazzled. Her hair was messy, her makeup was smudged, and she kept glancing nervously toward the door. What's wrong? It's about Katherine, and Victor, and other things. I set down the weights I'd been using and followed Sophie to a quiet corner of the gym. What kind of other things? Sophie took a deep breath. I need to tell you something that I should have told you months ago, about Katherine's affair. Sophie, it's over. Katherine and I are divorced. Victor's gone. Whatever you have to say, it doesn't matter anymore. It matters because it wasn't just an affair. It was more complicated than that. I studied Sophie's face, trying to read her expression. What do you mean? I mean, I helped orchestrate it. The words hit me like a physical blow. You what? I introduced Katherine to Victor. I encouraged her to spend time with him. I even suggested the hotel where they met. Why? Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Because I was angry with you. Because you fired me from your company 5 years ago and I wanted to get back at you. I stared at her, trying to process what she was telling me. 5 years ago, I'd been the office manager at Morrison Marine, and Sophie had worked there as a bookkeeper. I'd caught her skimming money from petty cash and had her fired immediately. You destroyed my marriage because I caught you stealing? I didn't think it would go that far. I thought Katherine would have a fling, you'd find out, and you'd be humiliated. I didn't think she'd actually fall for him. But she did. Yes. And then everything spiraled out of control. I sat down on a bench, feeling like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. How long have you been planning this? Since the day you fired me. I've been waiting for the right opportunity to hurt you the way you hurt me. I hurt you? Sophie, you were stealing from the company. It was just petty cash, a few dollars here and there. It was theft, and it was wrong. Sophie wiped her eyes with a tissue. I know that now. But at the time, I felt like you'd ruined my life. I couldn't get another job in accounting for months. I had to move back in with my parents. I was humiliated. So you decided to humiliate me? Yes. But I never meant for it to destroy your marriage. I thought Katherine was smarter than that. I thought she'd see through Victor's act. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor where fishing boats were coming in with the day's catch. Everything I thought I knew about the past year had been a lie. Not just Katherine's lies, but Sophie's manipulation, Victor's deception, even my own assumptions about what had gone wrong in my marriage. Does Katherine know? About my part in it? No, I never told her. Why are you telling me now? Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Because Victor came to see me yesterday. I turned around. Victor's back in town? He wants money. He says I owe him because his relationship with Katherine didn't work out the way we planned. You planned for them to be together permanently? I planned for Katherine to leave you for him. I thought it would be the ultimate revenge. But when Victor found out about Katherine's financial situation, he lost interest. Turns out he was only interested in her because he thought she had money. Katherine doesn't have money. I do. Exactly. And when Victor realized that Katherine would lose most of her assets in the divorce, he started looking for other options. That's when you caught him with the other woman. I sat back down, trying to piece together the timeline. So Victor was using Katherine to get to my money? Partly. I think he genuinely liked her, but he also saw her as a meal ticket. When that didn't work out, he moved on. And now he wants you to pay him? He says I promised him a wealthy wife, and I didn't deliver. He wants $50,000, or he'll tell Katherine that I set the whole thing up. I almost laughed. So Victor's trying to blackmail you for a scheme that was designed to hurt me, which ended up hurting Katherine more than anyone? Pretty much. What do you want me to do about it? Sophie looked surprised. I hoped you might help me figure out how to handle this. Why would I help you? You just admitted that you destroyed my marriage out of spite. Because if Victor tells Katherine the truth, it'll hurt her even more than she's already been hurt. She's been blaming herself for the affair, thinking she's a terrible person for cheating on you. If she finds out that I manipulated her into it... Sophie didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Katherine was already struggling with guilt and shame over the affair. Learning that her best friend had orchestrated it would be devastating. What exactly did you do? I told Katherine that you were taking her for granted. I pointed out every time you worked late or spent time at the gym instead of with her. I made her feel like you didn't appreciate her. And then you introduced her to Victor. I told her he was a client of mine, that he was charming and successful and looking for a good lawyer. I suggested she handle his legal work. And the rest just happened naturally? I may have mentioned that Victor found her attractive, and I may have suggested that she deserved someone who would treat her like a queen. I shook my head in amazement. You're a piece of work, Sophie. I know, I'm not proud of what I did. But you did it anyway. Yes. I stood up and walked toward the door. Good luck with Victor. You made this mess, you can clean it up. Grayson, wait. I stopped and turned around. What? I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am genuinely sorry for what I did to you and Katherine. Are you? Or are you just sorry that it backfired on you? Sophie didn't answer, which was answer enough. I left the gym and drove home, my mind racing with this new information. Everything I thought I knew about the past year had been wrong. Katherine hadn't just decided to have an affair, she'd been manipulated into it by someone she trusted. Victor hadn't just been an opportunistic predator, he'd been a willing participant in a revenge scheme, and I'd been the target all along. The question now was what to do with this information. Should I tell Katherine the truth? Should I confront Victor? Should I just let sleeping dogs lie and move on with my life? I was still thinking about it when Katherine called that evening. Grayson, we need to talk. Can you come over? Is everything okay? Just come over, please. Katherine's apartment was small but tastefully decorated with the kind of furniture that suggested she was trying to build a new life for herself. She looked tired when she answered the door, older than her 38 years. Thanks for coming. Do you want some coffee? Sure. We sat at her kitchen table, the same awkward politeness that had characterized most of our interactions since the divorce. Katherine wrapped her hands around her coffee mug and stared into it like she was reading tea leaves. Victor came to see me today. My heart rate quickened. What did he want? Money. He said I owed him for the time we spent together. Said he'd invested a lot in our relationship and deserved compensation. What kind of compensation? $20,000. I whistled softly. That's a lot of money. He said if I didn't pay, he'd tell everyone in town that I was a desperate housewife who threw herself at him. He'd make sure I never got another client. Are you going to pay him? Katherine looked up at me with tired eyes. I don't have $20,000, Grayson. The divorce settlement gave me enough to rent this place and get back on my feet, but I'm not wealthy. So tell him no. He said he'd make my life miserable if I didn't pay, and knowing Victor, he probably would. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about what Sophie had told me earlier. Victor was trying to extort money from both women, probably figuring that one of them would pay rather than deal with the embarrassment of his threats. Katherine, there's something you need to know about Victor, and about Sophie. What do you mean? I told her everything Sophie had confessed to me. Katherine's face went through the same range of emotions I'd experienced earlier. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally a kind of hollow sadness. Sophie set me up? According to her, yes. She manipulated me into having an affair to get back at you for firing her. That's what she says. Katherine put her head in her hands. Oh God, I'm such an idiot. No, you're not. You trusted someone you thought was your friend. I destroyed our marriage because of a revenge plot. You made choices, Katherine. Sophie may have influenced those choices, but she didn't make them for you. Katherine looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Do you think we could have worked things out if I'd known the truth? It was the question I'd been asking myself all afternoon. Would our marriage have survived if Katherine had understood that she was being manipulated? Would we have been able to rebuild trust if we'd known that the affair wasn't entirely her idea? I don't know, I said finally. Maybe, but we'll never know now. I'm so sorry, Grayson, for all of it. I know. We sat in silence for a while, two people who had once loved each other trying to make sense of how everything had gone so wrong. Finally, Katherine spoke. What should I do about Victor? Nothing. Let me handle Victor. What are you going to do? I'm going to make sure he understands that his extortion days are over. The next morning, I drove to the motel where Victor was staying. It was a run-down place on the outskirts of town, the kind of establishment that rented rooms by the week and didn't ask too many questions. Victor answered his door in a bathrobe and slippers, looking like a man who'd fallen a long way from his former glory. The expensive suits and flashy jewelry were gone, replaced by cheap clothes and a desperate expression. Grayson, I was wondering when you'd show up. Were you? Then you know why I'm here. If this is about Katherine, it's about Katherine and Sophie and your little extortion scheme. Victor stepped aside to let me into the room, which smelled like cigarettes and failure. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. You're trying to shake down both women for money, threatening to embarrass them if they don't pay. I never threatened anyone. No? Then what do you call demanding $20,000 from my ex-wife? Victor sat down on the unmade bed and lit a cigarette. I call it collecting on a debt. Katherine and I had a relationship. I invested time and money in that relationship. Now that it's over, I deserve compensation. That's not how relationships work, Victor. It's how this one worked. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot, where Victor's once pristine Maserati sat with a cracked windshield and a dented bumper. You know what I think. I think you're broke and desperate, and you're trying to squeeze money out of anyone who might pay. Think whatever you want. I think you got in over your head with some dangerous people, and now you need cash fast. Victor's hand trembled slightly as he brought the cigarette to his lips. You don't know anything about my situation. I know more than you think. I know about the gambling debts. I know about the people you owe money to. I know they're not the kind of people who accept payment plans. So what if they are? So maybe instead of trying to extort money from Katherine and Sophie, you should focus on finding a legitimate way to solve your problems. Victor laughed bitterly. Legitimate ways don't pay fast enough. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you got involved with loan sharks. I turned away from the window and looked at Victor, really looked at him. He was pathetic, a middle-aged man who'd built his life on lies and manipulation, and now those lies were catching up with him. Here's what's going to happen, Victor. You're going to leave Katherine alone. You're going to leave Sophie alone. You're going to pack up your things and get out of town, and you're never going to come back. And if I don't, then I'm going to make some phone calls to the people you owe money to. I'm going to tell them exactly where to find you. Victor's face went white. You wouldn't. Try me. That's basically a threat. No, Victor. What you're doing to Katherine and Sophie is a threat. What I'm doing is giving you a chance to disappear before your problems catch up with you. Victor stubbed out his cigarette and stood up. Fine, I'll leave town, but this isn't over. Yes, it is. It's been over since the day you decided to mess with my family. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Victor, if I ever see you in this town again, or if I hear that you've contacted Katherine or Sophie or anyone else I care about, I won't just make phone calls. I'll do a lot more than that. Victor nodded, understanding the message. I left him sitting in his shabby motel room, probably trying to figure out how he'd fallen so far so fast. That afternoon, I called Sophie and told her that Victor wouldn't be bothering her anymore. She thanked me, but I cut the conversation short. I wasn't ready to forgive her for what she'd done, and I might never be. I also called Katherine to let her know that Victor was leaving town. She was relieved, but I could hear the sadness in her voice. Learning the truth about Sophie's manipulation had been almost as devastating as the original betrayal. Grayson, she said before we hung up. Thank you for handling Victor, I mean. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You could have let him make my life miserable. You would have been justified in doing that. No, I wouldn't have. Whatever happened between us, you don't deserve to be extorted by a creep like Victor. Still, thank you. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and thought about the past year. My marriage was still over. Katherine and I were still divorced. Ella was still splitting her time between 2 homes instead of 1. But somehow, knowing the truth made it easier to bear. Katherine hadn't just decided she was bored with our marriage and wanted something more exciting. She'd been manipulated by someone she trusted, seduced by a man who saw her as a meal ticket, and caught up in a revenge plot she never knew existed. It didn't excuse her choices, but it explained them, and sometimes understanding is the first step toward forgiveness. A week later, I was at Ella's soccer game when I saw Katherine sitting in the stands on the opposite side of the field. She waved when she saw me, and I waved back. It was the first normal interaction we'd had in months. After the game, we walked to our cars together while Ella celebrated with her teammates. "She played well," Katherine said. "She did. She's been working hard in practice." "I'm glad. It's good for her to have something to focus on besides our divorce." We reached Katherine's car first, and she stopped and turned to face me. "Grayson, I've been thinking about what you said, about understanding being the first step toward forgiveness." "Yeah?" "I was wondering if maybe we could try being friends again, or real friends, not just co-parents who tolerate each other." I looked at my ex-wife, this woman who had been such a huge part of my life for so long. She looked hopeful but uncertain, like someone asking for a favor they weren't sure they deserved. "I'd like that," I said finally. "Really?" "Really. It won't be easy and it won't happen overnight, but I think we owe it to Ella to try." "And to ourselves?" "Yeah, to ourselves too." Katherine smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being a better person than I am." "You're not a bad person, Katherine. You just made some bad choices." "We all did." She was right. We'd all made bad choices, all been less than our best selves. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the point wasn't to be perfect, but to learn from our mistakes and try to do better next time. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the future. I was 44 years old, divorced, and starting over. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life I had, and maybe that would be enough. Ella was spending the night at Katherine's apartment, so I had the house to myself. I made dinner, watched a movie, and went to bed early. Simple pleasures, but satisfying ones. Just before I fell asleep, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This isn't over. V." I deleted the message without responding. Some people never learned when to quit, but that was Victor's problem now, not mine. I'd said what I needed to say, done what I needed to do. The rest was up to him. I turned off the phone and closed my eyes, finally ready to sleep peacefully for the first time in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to get things right. But tonight, I was content to just be still, to exist in the quiet space between one chapter of my life and the next. It wasn't the ending I'd expected when this all started, but it was an ending I could live with. And sometimes that's all any of us can ask for.